on the hunt for double-digit bass in Kentucky. First off, some of you are going to tell me I'm crazy. You don't go to Kentucky to catch a double-digit bass. And you may be right. But if you were going to catch a double-digit bass, where are your best chances? And what do you do to improve those chances? In this series, I'm going to take you on some of the lakes that I think offer the best opportunity in Kentucky for you to catch the bass of a lifetime. While you're here, hit that like and subscribe button.
It's early, we're heading to the lake. Nothing but setting the hook on big bass on my mind today. Come along, take a ride in the boat as we leave life on the bank in pursuit of that next heart-racing blow-up, followed by an acrobatic jump. We're going bass fishing today.
Where are you going to catch a 6-foot green bass?
That's a 7-pounder, man.
One tree, baby. One tree. One freaking tree. There's no way that is fake. There's no way. So, fishing timing is everything. The day we went to Fish Pond, it was cold. The ramp's actually pretty good shape for a bass boat. Had no trouble, loading and unloading. But this day, it was probably the toughest day of any of these lakes that we visited. So why do we choose Fish Pond? Well, you can't put a boat on High Splint to my knowledge, and High Splint has about 60% Florida genetics, and Fish Pond has about 45% Florida genetics, according to the Kentucky Black Bass Genetics Report. So looking at the data, the obvious places to run down trophy bass would be Fish Pond, High Splint, and Greenbow. But if you were going to run down trophy bass, where would you go? Martin's Fork, Pikeville City Pond, Paintsville Lake, Yatesville Lake, Carr Creek Lake. What other lakes would you suggest that we head to try to run down that elusive double-digit bass in Kentucky? So what does it take to grow a trophy bass in Kentucky? Most will tell you a strong forage base, including trout. Luckily we have some smaller lakes in Kentucky that get trout stockings every year. Some of these lakes like Fish Pond, High Splint, even Greenbow have grown our biggest bass. So we're going to visit some of those lakes in this series, and we're going to see if we can't run into one of those big trophy bass. Do you think we should head somewhere else in Kentucky to catch a double-digit bass? Let me know in the comments. So I like to get out in early March before everybody else hits the water. I think it's the greatest time of year to try to catch the biggest bass in the lake.
Yeah, they're in here. He had a picture of it. It was a big fish.
I caught an 8, you hear me screaming like a little girl.
Hell yeah, I'll listen.
If you've been on my channel before, one of my favorites, the Umbrella Flash Mob Junior, it's always been a staple for me, especially in the pre-spawn, trying to target big fish. Something that a lot of us have learned in the past few years, since the innovations with forward-facing sonar, a lot of these fish, especially in early March, they cruise around in open water, looking for maybe these trout, and it's just an easy meal. Quality.
Look how fat.
Look how fat that thing is. Healthy fish, man. Good stuff. Let's go. Hey. So I'm with Bryce McDonald here, and Bryce is as good with forward-facing sonar as anybody I've ever fished with. One of the lures that you have to use because forward-facing sonar is such a great tool, is the mini shad-style baits on the weighted jig head. And in this case, we're throwing a winged fluke. And that winged fluke, when you wiggle it, it just has a great action down there, and the fish can't stand it. That is so awesome. That's awesome. Most of these smaller lakes look just about exactly the same in eastern Kentucky. Fish and Wildlife does a great job with these lakes with the trout and the forage base. this one yet, but hey, we're on the board. It just seems to hold a lot of quality fish that don't necessarily get the pressure from the tournaments and the big events. And these lakes can be a really fun outing early in the spring. So this fish is big, but we saw bigger. You know, certain days, certain fish cooperated, and certain days, you know, they just didn't cooperate.
That's over 6. It's
Look at that. Jeez. We have
You catch one. What do you think that fish will weigh?
That scale's right there. There you go. I'm going 6.5.
It's so fat. 613.
Where are you going to get the 613?
That's a 7-pounder, man.
Look at that. Now, on the state record side, there are definitely some anomalies to this data and some question as to whether or not, you know, were fish moved from Florida after they grew, or were fish moved from Florida and then grown. So if you followed our efforts on Anglers for Improving Opportunities, you know, one of the things that we talk about often is relative weight. You know, relative weight is a measure used by fisheries biologists to determine the health of a bass population. So, you know, if you look at these fish that we caught in these videos, a lot of these fish are kind of short and stocky, which is a good thing. You know, these fish are probably younger fish and are already growing to, you know, really good size. So there's a lot of potential here. And these are the types of lakes with these high relative weights where you have the highest potential to see possibly a state record or a double-digit bass. You know, those are the lakes that we tried to target, you know, in these episodes to try and run down a double-digit bass in the state of Kentucky. Definitely a big one.